Welcome to the Warrior Razor podcast. We're your hosts, Angela
and Carrie.
We all need help and support to stay focused and challenged to courageously pursue the life God has called us to live. What we do matters.
Here on the Warrior Razor podcast, we seek Jesus first and use the skills, talents, and passions He's given us second.
Hey, welcome to the Warrior Razor podcast. I'm Angela Johnson, and I have the honor and privilege of introducing our guest today on the show, Kathy Chiero. Let me just tell you a little bit about her, but she has such an extensively impressive background in journalism, radio, and television communications. She began writing for a local newspaper at the age of 17 and worked for almost 20 years for the CBN, or the Christian Broadcasting Network, out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. While at the 700 Club, Kathy served as a senior producer, news anchor, and reporter, and an occasional co-host of the 700 Club television show. She left full-time television in 1996 to begin a career in real estate. She became a top producing agent in Central Ohio and still is to this day. She is such a gifted speaker, has such a heart for others, and through her own storytelling of her ups and downs in her marriage, with her parenting, all of the things that she's experienced in her life, we are so excited for you just to hear just a glimpse of her experiences and her storytelling and just God's grace through it all. So without further ado, let's get started on the interview.
Good morning, warriors. Time to start your day. Keep your head up, marching on. Don't let nothing stand in your way. Don't let nobody tear you down. You got so proudly wear your crown.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Warrior Razor podcast. We are so excited to have today on our show Kathy Chiero. And I don't know Kathy as well. So I'm going to start us off with a great question that I even want the answer to, and our audience will get the answer as well. So Kathy, tell us just a little bit about you. We want to know any fun facts you have, anything you want us to know that would help us to know who you are, Kathy.
Wow, that's a hard first question.
I know.
I am twice your age, so that's a lot of history to cover. I am today foremost a wife and mother. I have 3 adult children, and I just had my first 2 grandchildren last year. Yay. So they are still the center of my world. So all of you young moms who think there will be a day where your children are not the center of your world, that is a lie. So you will still drive by every wreck on 270 and look close to make sure it's not their car.
Oh, wow,
You will still leave your phone on at night in case your 33-year-old needs you at 2 a.m. So
I love it.
That doesn't end. No. But in addition to that, I am a real estate agent here in Central Ohio. I've done that for almost 30 years. Yeah. And my career before that I was a radio and television producer for the 700 Club television show. Wow. I started that career when I was about 20. And so my background, which has helped me quite a bit in real estate, is a communications-based background. I did a lot of radio, a lot of television, and still my passion, actually. And so here I am looking for Act 3 in my life, which honestly is quite similar to many of your listeners looking for Act 1 or 2.
Yeah.
You just rinse and repeat through life, starting over. So
that's a really good point. Really good point. I think that's so very true. And I love, it's funny to hear you talking, Kathy. I am an avid River here in Central Ohio. We have a radio station called The River, and it's our Christian radio station here. Mm-hmm. And I'm an avid listener to that. And I always hear your commercials. And so I'm like listening to you and I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm with a famous person here.
You know her voice. It's a very telltale voice.
Yeah.
Yes, I love your voice. It's the best. And
I'm famous in a very, very small fishbowl. So
Hey, that's all right. And I always love your voice because I'm like, oh, she's got like a deeper voice like I do. And sometimes you don't hear that with people. So I love it. I love it.
No, she's our celebrity. So
That's right.
but Kathy is near and dear to my heart because years ago in the 90s, she and I and our families went to church together. And
Very
then
cool.
beyond that, because I knew she was in the real estate the real estate world, when Derek and I were looking to buy our home together after we got married, we put you through the ringer. I think we looked at like 55 houses when it was all said and done.
Me?
I'm not kidding you because she knows Derek and he can't make a decision as well. And I always tell him Derek MD means make a decision. But I mean, you got your sainthood pin with working with us for that.
Well, you guys were fortunate that at that point we were in a market where there were 55 homes on the market.
Yeah, that's very true.
Tell Derek today he would have 3 homes. Pick one.
Exactly. Move or get off the pot. Well, one of the other things that I love about Kathy is her boldness. And I think that this transcends to all of the marketplaces that you found yourself in. But she literally you didn't knock on the door, but you put a letter in the mail when this house was not on the market and you said, I have a buyer, and she just did it. She basically got us this house when it wasn't even on the market. I mean,
that.
If that's not an ad for her her skill set, I don't know what it is.
I love that. That's
but
so cool.
Beyond the real estate space, she has also been just a voice of biblical and spiritual wisdom in my life, even recently, with just hearing from the Lord and just sending it. Just like I think I came to your heart and came to your mind, and you sent me a message, and I don't think you had any idea what the power of that message would be on the other end of just that simple text. But I thank you for that, and I thank you that you have the ears to hear, and then just the following through on being obedient to send that message for me personally. So this is a treat to have you on the show for sure. So
thank you.
Yes,
for sure. Well, let's dive into our wrapping up of this whole year's theme of small beginnings. Angela knew right away. She's like, I want Kathy to be our wrap up message because I think she's just gonna be the perfect voice to speak into this. And we focused on Zechariah 4:10. The Lord does not despise small beginnings. And we've talked to many business owners when it comes to this idea of small beginnings. And you hit on it even earlier. I don't know if you meant to, maybe you did, but if not, that's fine too. This idea of every act, right? Act 1, act 2, act 3, we have these different acts in our life. So really small beginnings are repetitive, right? So let's jump into this and talk about small beginnings and just share a little bit about your journey of, some small beginnings that you've had in your life and how that's impacted you, and maybe how those small beginnings, some of the wisdom that you have to get through those small beginnings.
Thank you. Yeah, small beginnings are tough because we don't live in a culture that respects small beginnings. There's no respect given to ministries that don't start with worldwide. Anytime there is an evangelical message regarding a ministry, it always starts with numbers. How many people do we reach? How many listeners do we have? How many followers do we have? So there's really no respect given to small beginnings, when in fact, Christ gives great respect to small beginnings because small beginnings take greater faith. When you have grown a ministry into a business, really, where you have thousands, millions of listeners or viewers or whatever, and I've experienced this, I've watched it, is your dependence on God lessens because you have built a structure under yourself that unfortunately you begin to depend on. If I start with 3 people who are faithful to my ministry, I'm going to be faithful to those 3 people in praying for them and lifting them up and relying on them and investing into their lives. When you get to 300,000 people, you are more dependent on systems and money and those sort of things that prop us up. So the first thing I would say is that small beginnings just don't get respect from our culture and from our world. The second thing I would say, and some of the things I'm going to say today are probably hard to hear because they run counter to our culture. And number one is not all ministries are meant to be big. All ministries are meant to minister to the core and the people that God sends you to. But that might be the 3 children in your house for now. That might be it. That's what God
just got chills.
I did too.
Yeah.
That's the small beginning. And it may be that that's what you have to be satisfied with for now. And that for now could be years, could be weeks, it could be months, it could be years. So the first thing to really pray about is that ask that God give you a contentment for where you are right now. And to recognize that this right now might be what God's called you to without growth potential. And secondly, in the middle of that, to realize that's okay. If you're doing what God called you to do and you're ministering only to a handful of people, then you are fulfilling God's call on your life right now. And you have to shut out the noise that says you should be bigger, or you should be doing a podcast, or you should be doing a mailing, or do you have a newsletter, or do you have a calendar? All those things that begin to overwhelm you. And what they do is they foster defeat. Because you think, if I'm not doing these things, I'm not successful. And that is your culture speaking. That is not God's word to you. The second thing is you really have to know that you have the gifting and talent to do this. That you are not just following because you think it would be fun, or you think you want to be the next woman of faith speaker standing on a platform. You really have to jump into each of these things with the knowledge that this is what God called you to do, and you have the skill set. That's really hard. You know, I'll give you an example. I believe it's been confirmed, and so I might be going out on a limb here, but I believe God called me to teach and to speak. And so 4 or 5 years ago, I was invited to join a group of women who were being raised up in one of the major mega churches here in Columbus. I won't mention the name, but I was invited to a 12-week course with them where they would raise up women leaders to teach. And so I agreed to commit to going to this every Wednesday night for 12 weeks with these women. And the protocol is that we would sit in a room, and I think there were about a dozen, maybe 15 of us. And we would be given a topic, a scripture, and we would, for our next week's assignment, we would be asked to do a 2-minute, a 4-minute, maybe a 5-minute talk on this. And we would each do it around the room, and then we would critique each other. And I will tell you that of the dozen women there, 11 of them were horrible. They were horrible. They should not have been there. I don't know who told them they would be good at this.
Their mother.
Maybe their husband or their mother or somebody. And yet 11 times around the room, they were, oh, wonderful. That was great. And I love this point. And I just started shutting my mouth because I thought, I'm Simon Cowell here. I want to stand up and say, that was horrible. Like, you never lifted your eyes. You were reading from a paper. You said 17 times. And so, again, I ended up being, I think, booted out of the group because
they gave Simon the boot.
I gave Simon the boot. They said, thanks, but no thanks. And I got turned on by the mean girls, you know?
You got the foot of fellowship out the door.
Yes. Yeah. But my point is, maybe they could be developed, maybe over a long period of time. But most of those women, I believe in my heart, were pursuing a call that wasn't theirs. And maybe they wanted to be the woman on stage. They wanted to be the ministry leader. They wanted to be the face on the brochure. But it didn't take a rocket scientist to say, you are not good at this.
Yeah.
So one of the things I would say, when you are at that small beginning of really thinking God called you to do this, I would look into a skills test. I mean, there's a lot of them online. There's ministry tests that say, what are your strengths?
Yep.
And then I would go to somebody who is not my friend and not my relative and say, would you be honest with me? Am I good at this?
Yeah.
And then prepare your heart for the truth. And
That's so
you'll
good.
know the truth, because the flattery is not our friend. Flattery is empty and it's vacuous, and it often keeps us on a rabbit trail we shouldn't be on. What we want is truth. And that doesn't mean truth can't be flattering, but flattery of itself is it will keep you on a path. And the reason that's dangerous is every day you are on a path doing something you're not called to is a day you're not on the path that God called you to.
Ugh,
And
that's a nugget right there.
Yes, it is.
So many women.
Yeah.
And the next thing I would say is, leaders are 1%ers, meaning not all of you are called to be a leader. There is great value in being a Timothy. There is great value in being a behind the scenes loyal follower. And there is also great reward. God doesn't reward the leader with a big Christmas present and you get a little Christmas present for being a great follower. God sees that you followed in your calling, and he blesses you according to your calling. So so I would say, if you are in small beginnings and you're frustrated and your wheels are stuck in the mud, maybe it's time to step back and say, is this my calling? Or am I better being a support to somebody else who's better at it than I am? And admit that.
Wow, that's so good.
My best friend in the world, and we've been best friends since we were 17, and I tell her all the time, she is such a gift to me. And when we were in college together, we met in a radio television class, and we talk about this all the time. Back then, we were the only two women in the class. The rest were boys at that time. And I remember they ushered us into the studio to sit in front of the microphone for the first time. I was 18 years old, and Micah too was 18. And the instructor said, okay, who wants to go first? And I said, I do. And I went and sat down in front of the microphone, and Micah went right behind me fixing the microphone for me. I mean, we were 18 years old, and we laugh about that now because now we're 64, and she is still rushing around behind me to fix the microphone because she doesn't care. She says, I don't need to be out front. I don't need to be the face. She is equally talented, if not more talented than me. But she says, my call in life is to support the people out front. Today, her job is she works for a national ministry television show, and she's the one all dressed in black during their programs because she's running around fixing people's microphones. And so I say that there's great value in that. And some of you out there listening who are trying to be the person behind the microphone might be the person fixing the microphone.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah.
Carrie and I
That was
have
a
been
long answer. I'm sorry.
No, that's so
that's
good.
so
Carrie
good.
and I have been talking about recently this whole cultural development of like charisma versus character, and how we see the rise and fall of so many Christian celebrities, even because they have just tried to shoot themselves to this platform where they have not been developed to even be there. And then we see the aftermath of that and we think, oh, that's so sad and so unfortunate. But maybe if they had just paused, taken a step back, had some perspective, talked to somebody that was true and trusted and could really speak some life-giving, like you said, truth into their life, but in love, like, hey, let's take a step behind the scenes a little bit and let me fix your crown before you get out there and try to sparkle before you're ready, because the culture is not forgiving. And if you don't have that character developed, it will eat you alive.
And celebrity is, and I don't say this having lived celebrity, but I'm saying Celebrity is unforgiving. They love you until they don't. And so what we see a lot of times in Christian celebrity is that the wrong things are elevated. Appearance is elevated. Again, this followers are elevated. The sale of books is elevated.
Yeah.
Number of viewers is elevated. And so what decreases in there is what really matters. What goes the distance, and what goes the distance is character. What goes the distance is a foundational truth that you can turn to. You know, last Sunday I spoke at a church and I was talking about what is an abundant life. And if you would ask culturally what is an abundant life, it would be money and toys and houses. But what is an abundant life is that ability to take everything that happens to you in life and immediately connect it to what God's doing in your life, whether it be a victory or a tragedy or a joy or a setback. When we can stop and the first thing we say is, where is God in this? And react accordingly, that is abundant life. That's the ability to take a mundane life and raise it into the spiritual realm so that we are reacting. And you know what? That doesn't come just because you're famous, and that doesn't come just because you're talented. That comes because you're road weary, because you've been through it enough that you say, I know that this is not a challenge I can take on my own. And I'm going to retract and say, God, where are you in this?
Yeah.
Will you take us back to, you know, when you said 18 years old, learning this career of radio broadcasting, your experience with, and though you may not have seen yourself as Christian celebrity, you sat there at the table with some of them for the season that you were in that industry, for sure. You watched all of that. You were front row seat to all of that. Will you talk through that just kind of on a high level, and then the transition of that, and then to where you are today?
And I'm your timing for this podcast is perfect. And I'll tell you in the end why, something that happened real recently in my life. But I was a really odd teenager compared to friends. I was raised in a fundamental Baptist home. But beyond that, I connected spiritually with the Lord at a very young age. So while my friends were, going to parties and getting drunk, I was at home listening to Kenneth Copeland tapes and listening, reading and studying. And so I early on connected with and understood the idea of hearing from God. When I was 16 years old, I was praying, and already at that age knew that I wanted to be in radio and television. In fact, my earliest home movies when I was a baby, I made out of Tinker Toys, a microphone and headset. And so I knew that. I was fortunate in that when I was very young, I already knew what I was called to do. Yeah. So I began writing. The only Christian TV I knew was Pat Robertson and the 700 Club. And we happened to live, my dad was military. We happened to live in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia, which is right over the river from Virginia Beach. So this is all I knew. So I began writing letters, of course, pre-internet, to the 700 Club, and which now I would cringe to see the letters, because what does a 17-year-old have to say? But anyway.
It was your small beginning, Kathy.
It was my very small beginnings. It was a letter and a stamp. And but I told them, I said, God's told me that I'm going to work for you. And so what do I need to do next? And I would get back these letters saying, thank you for your interest in working for one of those. And I would get, and by the way, when I went to college and met Micah, my best friend, she would help me write the letter. She's excited as I was. She would think, oh yeah, you're gonna get a job there.
She's believing for you.
She was believing with me. Yeah.
Yes.
So that was the Kenneth Copeland in us, we were believing that. So right. So anyway, just to skip ahead, I ended up having such a passion for radio and television. I had trouble in college because I didn't care about anything else. I didn't want history or political science. I loved my radio TV classes. Yeah. And between my sophomore and junior year in college, I got a job in radio. in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is where my dad had been transferred to. Started my letter writing again back to Virginia Beach, and they hired me. They hired me when I was 19, maybe 20. I moved to Virginia Beach with a suitcase and got my first job in radio with them. Wow. And so that was a very small beginning. That was sleeping on literally on my clothes on the floor in my apartment, and didn't own a car, didn't know anything. All I saw was that God did what God said he would do. And so I started in radio with them. And at the time, today I would not make it past the front door. But back then they were looking for warm bodies who would work for nothing. And so
here I am, God.
I remember working in radio with them for about 2 years, and then a job opened with the television end, and I went to interview for the job. And I remember the guy who would have been my supervisor was looking at my resume, and he said, "Doesn't even look like you've ever rented a television." He said, "Have you done anything in television?" I said, "No, nothing." But they hired me, and I started out literally sweeping the floors of the 700 Club. And I didn't, I never even looked at that as small beginnings. I looked at it as proximity. I was getting up every day. I was getting up every day and standing 6 feet from Pat Robertson. I was getting up every day and putting microphones on the most famous celebrities in Christendom in that time. And not only that, it was my job to sit and listen to them for 2 hours to teach about godly principles and things like that. So, I don't even know that I looked further to say one day I'll be sitting in that chair. All I knew was God had done what God said he would do. I was working for the 700 Club in a small capacity. And then they started developing various shows, and I was young, and I was 21, 22 at the time, and I was attractive, and they said, "Well, let's put Kathy up there and see what she can do." And so I started doing various shows and reporting and things like that. And I always say I got under the radar because everyone assumed since I was there I knew what I was doing, and I did not. I remember one time, Micah, again, my friend, she ended up getting a job there too. And I remember we were working on one of our first video stories, and the editor looked at us and said, this was back in the days of, they had big tapes that you put things on.
Right.
He goes, "Where's your voiceover tape?" And we looked at each other, and neither of us had a clue what a voiceover tape was. So we said, "Hold on a minute, we'll go get it." So we ran out of the video, and Micah looks at me and she goes, "What's a voiceover tape?" I said, "I don't know. Let's go ask somebody." So that's how horrible we were. We were like horrible at it, but a lot of God's grace. And had I taken my own advice back then, I would have said, "No, we're not good at this. We don't know what we're doing." But that was also the level of the ministry at that time. Everybody was brand new and doing their best. And so I grew with the ministry, and I started doing more and more. And I was pretty good at it, and I got hired to work in their news division, and then I worked in Israel for a year. And then in the mid-'80s, Pat Robertson left the network for a little bit to go run for president at that time. You guys are far too young to remember that, but he did.
I do remember that. We do remember that.
So during that period, they called me to come be on the set to co-host the 700 Club because he was not there. So I did that with Ben Kenchlow. So, and then from there, it ended up being a 20-year career with them. And then I ended up getting married, having kids, and I couldn't travel anymore. So I became a realtor. But I need to tell you a story because this just happened about 2 months ago. And I'll cry when I tell you this story because it's such a God thing. But 2 months ago, I got a call I'm still friends with a lot of people at CBN. And one of the men who works in what we call the videotape library, where they archive all these things, he called me, or actually texted me and said, "Kathy, 700 Club is getting ready to get rid of all the really old videotape, like from 30, 40 years ago even." And they said, "Do you want any of your stories? Do you want any of those before they get rid of them?" And here's me. I'm like, "Nah, it's all right. I'm good. You guys." And Mike, my husband, was here, and he said, wait, hold. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Tell them yes. So they
It's not for you, for your kids. Yeah.
Oh God. Well, now I feel so stupid for saying that. But he asked us to send one of those big recording disc things, and he said, I'll put some stories on here. So 2 weeks ago, I get in the mail this disc where he put over 100 of my stories on, which I can't even tell you how much work that was on his end. But he started from when I was 20 years old and went all the way to when I left CBN when I was almost 40. Okay.
Wow.
And so he put all these stories in line and all stuff. And Mike sat here in our office and started watching them because he's never seen them. I mean, we didn't know that. So he starts watching them, and I start having this sort of visceral reaction to hearing, and he goes, Kathy, you've got to come over here and watch this. And I didn't want to look at them. And I and when that happens in me, I stop and ask, why are you having this reaction? Like, what is it that you don't want to go look at that? And I realized that the reason I didn't want to go see it is because at age 21 and 22 and 23, I was so insecure. And when you're on television, you are the product and you get criticized nonstop. You're too fat, you're too thin, your hair is funny. Why are you talking like that? Who told her to dress like that? And why is her voice sounds funny. And I realized the reason I didn't want to look at it is I was sure when I watched it, I would be horrible. Like I thought, if I watch it, I'm going to see all those horrible things that I remember people saying. Now, people often also said good things, but we don't remember that.
You don't.
All we remember is the criticism that we got back then.
Yeah.
And when I went over to, and I tell you what, it's a weird thing. It's a bizarre phenomena to watch. It's one thing to look at yourself as a picture when you're young.
Yeah.
But when you're seeing yourself on television as a 20-year-old or a 22-year-old or a 23-year-old, and you're watching it third person, I started crying because this is where I started, because I wanted to reach out to that young girl and say, you are good. You were good. You were a treasure. And where are all those people that criticized you? And where are all those people that said you weren't good enough? You were good enough to do this. And I wanted to go to my daughters and daughters-in-law and say, don't take what took me 30 years to learn, is that you are precious right where you are. And certainly there's inexperience and there's youth and all those things. But when you're doing what God called you to do, and I want to say, I was doing what God called me to do. And when you're doing that, and when you're in the zone and you know that that's what God's called you to do, you are just fine. You are not measured by whether or not you had a cold sore that day, or you're not measured by whether that was a good hair day, or whether what you said was perfect, or what were you. I remember one time, I got a call from my producer, and I was pregnant with Jordan, and he's 32 now, 33. I was pregnant with Jordan, and the producer called me and said, Pat wants to know if you're gaining weight. He says you look fatter on TV. And of course I was pregnant. And one of the stories, so of course that's all you remember, is I must have looked horrible during that period. And one of the stories that he put on here was one of them while I was pregnant with Jordan. And I remember looking at it thinking, I did not look horrible. I looked like I was pregnant, but
you look pregnant. Yeah.
You look pregnant, but yet 33 years later, I still remember that phone call, So one of the gifts in that, and I wrote my friend at CPN sent a letter saying, what a gracious, gracious gift you gave me. And thank you for not listening to me. That to be able to hand that off to my children. Yes. But also to be able to look at myself and say, when God's called you to do something and you're in the middle of doing it, you're going to have stone throwers. You're going to have people, first of all, out of jealousy or out of just being critical, or because it's our culture and our culture worships perfection, because of not being perfect, you're going to have the critics and the stone throwers. And you've got to be rock solid in knowing that's what God called me to do. And I'll tell you what, that rock solid, that's what God called me to do, does not come from people telling you you're wonderful. Because for every 5 people telling you you're wonderful, there's going to be 10 criticizing you. Where it comes from is being on your knees and on your face before God and knowing that even in the darkest time of your life, and even when nobody's around it, even when it's just you and God, God is saying, yes, that's what I called you to do. And keep on, daughter, keep on going, because I called you to do this. Now, the confirmation of that should happen in other ways. I mean, I was 23 and on a national show being watched by 6 million people a day. That should have been confirmation, okay? But even in the middle of that, there was such insecurity and such doubt, and you know, my foundation would shake. And so the other thing I would say to your viewers and your listeners is to say that attack never stops. Even when you're successful, even when you are big, it doesn't stop from the inside, and it doesn't stop from the outside. And if you start missing that time with the Lord, if you start thinking I can skate on my own because I've got this part down, you're going to be subject and vulnerable to those attacks. You've got to be able to take an attack and say, you know what, I'm fine. And you know how I know I'm fine is because I was on my knees this morning. I was on my knees this morning and God spoke to me. So get out of my way and let me move forward in what God's called me to do. And that's the only way you'll survive. Otherwise, you are going to begin to be waving in the wind to try to be what everybody says you should be. And you're going to end up way off course for what God's called you to be. And that's a rough road, but that's what God will do for you.
Man, I saw Carrie take her pen down earlier in this conversation. You've been taking notes. I mean, there's been so many nuggets of just absolute truth, Kathy, and it's because you've lived it and you've experienced it firsthand. And with the same comfort that you have received now, hopefully some of our viewers and our listeners will receive that from the other end of this conversation as well. I mean, I'm just encouraged already, just 4 seconds into the call.
Well, let me say one other thing, and I want to say this too, because you guys are arbiters of words. Words are so powerful, and they are so, I speak this when you're talking to your children or your spouse or whatever, as we all know, when it's 10 years from now and 20 years from now, we so readily remember the harsh words or the critical words. And we tend to not remember the words of blessing and the words of encouragement. And one of the reasons why is we don't hear them as often. And so we need to be always cognizant about the words we speak and purposeful. I'm a big fan. I call it eulogizing the living. I'm a big fan of telling people what they need to hear now, not at their funeral, of telling them what the words of who they are and what they're good at and how you're blessed by them. And to say that while they're living and while they're in front of you, and constant and purposeful, even if it's awkward or you feel silly or whatever, to take the time to go out of your way and say, let me tell you what I love about you. And bless somebody with those words, because we never hear it. We very rarely hear it. And we need an equal dose of those words. And when you're in leadership, like you two women are, you have no idea how powerful your words are. You have no idea whose life you will change because you took a moment to encourage and speak into somebody's life. And they'll carry that in their head and say, I remember when Carrie said this to me. I remember when Angela said this to me. And that we have to wake up every day to be purposeful about that.
Well, and to your point, when I've received that from others, I get it so rarely that it feels very weird, like to receive it from someone, so to your point of, we don't do that enough. I have been the receiving end of that. And I'm like, wait, this feels awkward, like so strange. And it shouldn't. It should be the norm, right? It should
And
be.
Carrie, and what our tendency is to deflect it or defer it.
Right.
To say,
Right.
oh, that's not right. Oh, I'm
Right.
sure you blah, blah, blah. And to play it down. And what we need to learn to do is say, thank you so much for sharing that with me. You have made my day. Thank you for doing that.
Yep.
I have
because to deflect it or defer it is to say, God, I know you're giving me this blessing. I'm giving it away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, we need to be open to hearing that.
There have been many times where I have said, given a compliment or whatever, and the person, it's nothing, it's fine. I said, no, stop. And Carrie has said this to me. She says, let Jesus wash your feet, just sit in this and receive this gift, receive the compliment. So I have actually worked to stop people and just say, no, I want you to hear my words. Really, really sit in this, because it made an impact to me, and you need to know that on the other end of that. And I don't think we do that enough. But when we do practice it more often, it gets less awkward. It gets less weird and uncomfortable.
It does.
It's like those hugs that people just sit in there for a little bit longer than the 15 seconds. Like, no, you're here for it. You sit in this, you're going to receive this squishy hug of mine.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Can we back up to one? I was, like she was saying, I was writing down notes. Can we back up to one thing you said very early on? You said, not all ministries are going to be big. And I love that point, because I feel like in a culture where, like you're saying, if you don't have the numbers, if you don't have the views, if you don't have the following, what you're doing must not be enough. Not even just in ministry, but in small business, right? The people you're impacting, the cookies you're baking, the customers you have for whatever business you're in.
Yeah.
If you're not, if it's not huge, it's not enough. And I just wanted to come back to that, because there's such a lie that Satan has, successfully put into the heads of many of us. And we'll have moments or even permanently that if what we're doing isn't grand, and I think social media perpetuated that. Yeah, that it's not enough. And Angela and I talk about this a lot, because we hold everything that we do very open-handed, because we want God. We feel like we're following God, doing what he's asking us to do. And so we're like, hey, you bless it how you want to, but that can be really hard when we see other people doing the same thing, and they're like light years ahead of us. And again, followers, numbers, all the things. And we're here, we're like, but we got to remember, we're making an impact.
Sure.
And so I just wanted to come back to that, because it is such a hard thing to remember. And I think you need people around you to say this to you all the time. That your business, your ministry, whatever it is, that size is not an indicator of how God is using it and blessing people with it. That was such a powerful statement you said earlier.
Jesus had 12 followers. Okay. And let's take that in social media terms. If you have 12 followers, now you're not in business. Okay.
Right.
And so, but size in God's kingdom, size does not equal success.
Yeah.
And size does not equate to impact, and size does not equate to lives changed.
Yeah.
I would venture to say that some of those ministries that you would describe as having catapulted ahead, they're not bad people or bad ministries, but numbers do not equate to lives changed. And so, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you will always be small, that you will grow. I think my point is that you have to do two things simultaneously, which is very difficult to do. You have to be content where you are, purposeful where you are, targeting where you are, and at the same time looking for wisdom for growth of where you're going.
Yeah.
Yes.
But when we begin to hunger after the growth more than we focus on the impact of what we're doing, then we're losing sight of what God's called us to do.
Yeah.
And so, what I heard the other day, a very, very depressing statistic or fact, and that is that most all of us walking the earth today will be totally forgotten by the fourth generation. In other
Yes,
words,
I heard
four
this too.
generations after us, you will not have existed on earth anymore. And so our time on earth is that big. And so when it is measured not by how many people know our name or how many people have seen our face, but who will show up to your funeral to say,
Yeah.
this person changed my life.
Yeah.
Someone asked me the other day how I would measure my life, at the end of things. And I thought, well, first of all, outside God has his own measurement, but I would measure my life by how many people came up to my kids at my funeral and said, your mom touched my life in this way. Mm-hmm. And I said, because that's real impact, real change of life, real relationship. And I think we need to look at our ministries, and I'll talk about business in a minute. I think we need to look at our ministries as to really how connected we are with the people to whom we're ministering. Are they being touched by us? Are our prayers soaking them? Are we seeing those the real life change in the impact that we're doing? And if that means 3 people, that's 3 people who are going to remember your name, for a long time. Yeah. Now, when you do that successfully, and when you do it and combine it with some of the tools God's given you, your ministry is going to grow, but that should be almost a side effect to what you're doing, and not necessarily your purpose. Because here's what's happened: when growth becomes your purpose, then you are measuring yourself by everyone else's growth around you. And you stop measuring impact, and you stop measuring, am I still doing what God called me to do? Am I still walking with God? And I'll tell you what becomes really, really hard. And I think anybody will say this who's ever been a leader in a business or a leader in the ministry: the larger it gets, the harder it is to stay to your roots, to stay to what God called you to do. Yep. And so God simply is, if you outgrow that truth, meaning you're growing faster than your character can keep you, you're going to be a disaster. And so slow growth is God's intention many times, so that we add layer upon layer, precept upon precept, so that we never forget, even when we are standing at the mountaintop, we never forget the foundation that got us there and what keeps us there.
That's so good.
And I heard Joyce Meyer say once that as ministries grow, she goes, your problems grow, your issues grow. You add zeros to the amount of money you need to run it with, which in effect, adds problems. And so again, if you don't have the character to withstand that, you're going to end up in the trash heap. You're going to end up in the failure.
Yeah. And I think what speaks to this too is the fact that there's room at the table. This means there's more room at the table, because what we're doing here in Central Ohio, if it who we're impacting, and we're hoping to slow grow, we're hoping to take all these things you're saying, and make sure we're keeping the main thing. But that means that somebody else in California might need this too. And there's room at the table for someone in California to do something similar. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I would take it back a step for the conversation. Yeah. And you shared the journey from a brand spanking new 20-year-old learning the ropes of this industry all the way up to a 20-year career, having your babies. And then you touched on it a little bit with your timeline, that you transitioned from that space to then the career that you're in now. Talk to us a little bit about when you were behind the microphone on the screen. You knew, even just confirming it, seeing it 2 weeks ago, the compilation of your career that gentleman had shared with you, you knew you were at the center of God's will for your life. And God is a God who doesn't change. So talk about how the feeling of transitioning from time on air, time on the camera, to where you are now with the career that you, again, another small beginning where you had to build up from nothing to where you are today.
Well, first of all, I got into real estate at that time, I felt, by accident. I was laid off from CBN after 20 years there, but I had just gotten my real estate license. And the only reason I got my real estate license is because I had a young son who was getting ready to go into kindergarten, and I lived in a community that I wanted him at a Christian school, so we were going to move from one community to another. And I thought, how hard can this be? I'll get a real estate license and sell this house and buy another. And in my math, I said, if I never use that real estate license again, I made money selling a house and buying a house. So that was the only reason I got a real estate license. And then I got my license in October of '96, and at the time I was still working for CBN. And then in January of '97, the 700 Club again went through some financial stuff, and I think that it was because Pat Robertson at that time was making a change in some directions. So they laid me off, and I was okay with that because at that point I had 2 kids and the travel was getting difficult.
Yeah.
And I happened to put my feet in the real estate water literally the month and year that interest rates dropped below 8% for the first time in 2 decades. Wow. So I thought real estate was the easiest money I ever made. And so I ended up all of a sudden being kind of thrown into a new career. And I still say I said back then, and I still say now, that I'm going to be out in 6 months. It just never occurred to me that I would still be doing this. And so because my heart was in radio and television, I worked a short stint with a local big church that has a television ministry, but that was not a good fit for me. And so I ended up doing real estate. And the other, and just because of my nature, I'm a type A person. I don't do anything small. I was thinking, okay, how do I grow this business? Because of my communication background, I knew that I could stand in front of a group and teach. So I started doing a seminar-based marketing where I did home seller and home buyer seminars. Yep. And then because of my radio background, I said, well, I can advertise on radio, so there was a lot of blending there of my past career. But in my head, it was always temporary until I got back to what is my passion and my where my heart is, and that is the teaching and speaking and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Well, that's gone on now for 28 years.
All those 6 months have added up.
A lot of 6 months in there. And my math's horrible. I think that's like 38 6 months, 48 6 months. So anyway, so there's a lot of frustration in that. I used to lay on my face before God and ask for his forgiveness for whatever I did to spin me out of that world and into selling houses. I've spent many hours on my knees saying, God, I do not want to stand before you and say that I'm a member of the $25 million club. Where is the ministry in that? Like I bet was a lot of frustration there, and it's taken me several years, but I'll tell you, number one, my business has become tremendously successful, far more than I could have ever that I ever thought I would be in an industry that I don't like particularly. Right. But I'll tell you what
truth in that.
Yeah.
That's so true.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what it did. One of the other gifting that I have that is woven into my DNA, it is the air that I breathe. I would just give up and fall down if I couldn't do it, is giving. Giving is natural. Thank you, Kenneth Copeland. All the way back,
full circle.
Yeah, full circle. Still have those tapes. And I learned to give at a very young age. When I was 16, I learned to give. And I have discovered over the years that is not a natural gift. It's not natural to most people. No. But I walk through the universe every day as a giving radar. Where are their needs? Where can I give?
Yeah. It is truly a spiritual gift of generosity to have.
Yeah. And so real estate has enabled me to give and give generously and give abundantly, so much that my accountant swears every year I'm going to get audited. He goes, no, they will not believe that you really gave that amount of money. And so what real estate has allowed me to do over the years is to operate in this entirely separate area of giving and generosity that I never would have been able to do on a salary. And it is. And so that's a huge and welcome trade-off to me, is that to be able to, I might not love it, but to be able to walk in that enables me to never say no to a need, to say, you got a need, we'll do this. So I have amazing stories of where God has led me to give, only to see God return in terms of abundance in my business because of faithfulness in giving. And so God knows that about me. God knows that he can trust me with the money, because it's going to go right back out when it comes in. And so so that has been, it wasn't early in my career, it was a lot of frustration, but now I've looked at it and say, okay, I've been able to do these things because of this, and I'm grateful that God put me in that place to do it. But now that I'm looking at Act 3, that's the real prayer right now, is because God knows now, like, I could not operate in a space of not making, I don't want to sell real estate anymore, but I could not operate in a space of not being able to give. So my curiosity is, what is God going to do with that? Like, how is God going to allow me to ease out of this real estate business, which I'm actively working to do, while still retaining a passive income so that I can still give? And I just don't believe that my God will shut that off and say, okay, now you're going to go live on a fixed income and, give $100 a month. I don't believe that. I believe that God is going to be, as he always is, a creative God, to say, this is what I've created. This is your next step. Walk in it and trust me to provide that you can still give.
Oh gosh, I just love hearing you talk about, because I do think my mind's a hot mess right now. Okay, let me back up.
I know, it's a lot. Kathy, you're just like, oh, this is good. It's good.
It's so good. I love hearing you say just how hard it was to be doing something that you thought was, maybe, these aren't your words, so correct me if I'm wrong, but felt maybe wasteful, or felt maybe, because you were so, you knew where God wanted you to be early on. So to then step in something that's not that, and to hear you be honest and not make it all fluffy and, oh, it was fine. No, it was hard. Like, you were on your knees asking God why, but to be faithful, to stick to it, to get to the place where you're like, oh, okay, I see what you're doing here. You're using this other gift that I have in this area, and you're providing. Because I think so many times we don't want to stick in the hard. We don't want to be face down for very long.
Right.
We're not patient people. We're not willing to be face down for very long, to where we're like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to start controlling things because you're not showing up for me like you said you would, or you did before. And that's really hard to do. So to hear that you walked through that and were successful with it, I thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah. Carrie, that idea of these. Oh, go ahead, Kathy.
I was going to, Carrie, that is the space that our culture does not support.
No, exactly.
Our culture would tell us that if you are walking in that space, then you're doing something wrong.
Right.
Excuse me. But God is saying, no, that is the space where you are right where I want you to be. And that is that Jacob wrestling overnight. That is the space of saying, God, where are you when you said, you have to realize, in a 6-month period, I went from sitting on the chair of the 700 Club, being put in pretty clothes I didn't own, having professional people do my hair and makeup, and speaking at women's events every weekend, and thinking I'll do this the rest of my life because this is what God called me to do, to getting married. By the way, living 4 blocks from the beach in Virginia Beach, where the sun shines 300 days a year, to literally within 6 months in a bad marriage, living in Westerville, Ohio, where the sun didn't come out for 6 months, and going to Kroger's because I was lonely, because I didn't have any friends, and thinking I just need to go see people.
Wow.
And so if you don't think that I viewed that as punishment from God, all I did was say, God, what did I do wrong? And I was crying, and God help me, and all these sort of things. And then even when I eased out and began doing real estate and had great success in real estate, I had such a firm knowledge on the eternity of knowing what was valuable. And to To this day, I don't go to awards things. To this day, I get awards that end up in the trash because I just don't care. It's like there's so much temporal to that, and I don't
It's
care.
not the motivation of your heart.
I don't care. I don't even know. I don't even know awards I win because I don't go, and so I don't care. But what I did care about, I was so very aware of the brevity of life, and I said, God, every day I'm showing a house, is a day I'm not ministering to somebody.
Right.
And yet God began to show me there is ministry across those dining room tables. Like if there are 5 reasons to sell a house and 4 are bad, they're divorce or death or illness or loss of job. And so you are right at the core of ministry sitting at dining room tables.
Yes.
So I began saying, may I pray with you? Or can we pray over this? Or let me share with you what I believe God's doing here. Those sort of things. So you begin to implement ministry where you are. You begin to touch lives where you are. Then I began to do more seminars and reach out so that as my name got to be known more, well, name brings influence. So then you can begin to be that agent who talks about God. Well, that's that agent that we ask to pray over our meal every day. That's our agent. Other Christian agents start kind of glomming around you because they know, well, Kathy spoke out and she's still doing well. So you begin to build spheres of influence where God takes you. Now, let me say, does that take away the passion? Absolutely not.
Sure.
I did a radio show about, gosh, it's hard to believe it's been 10 years ago, where I just created it on my own. I went to 610 and said, I want to do a Sunday afternoon show. And they looked at me skeptically, like a crazy housewife that just wanted to do radio. And I ended up diving back in for about a year to do that show every weekend. And I loved it. And it showed me that I could still do it. But it wasn't God's timing. I was kind of pushing that cart before the horse. So I still believe that that's out there. I still believe that God's going to circle back around and say, okay, I'm going to now take all this life experience and put you in an arena where it matters. I laugh now. I seriously do. I look back at when I was 22 and speaking at women's events, and I think, what did I say? I was not married. I had no children. Like, what wisdom did I have to impart? Why did they let me in the arena? But again, that's the vacuousness of Christian celebrity. I was only there because I was on TV every day. And I had paper thin credentials spiritually, and so now now God is saying, okay, now I have filled out your credentials. Now you have a bad marriage and you have imperfect kids and you have
all the experience.
You have all the experience. You have a kid who spent the night in jail. Your dog spent the night in jail. You've got a second husband that you love dearly. I mean, so now God says, now you've got something to say. Now I'm saying, okay, God, where do I say it? Where do I say it? And that's Act 3 for me. That's Act 3 is, okay,
I love
God,
it.
Where do we take that package and how do we deliver it?
So
because
good.
now there's so much more humility. There's so much more. Been there, done that. There's so much more lack of judgment. There's hardly anything you can tell me anymore that I think, oh yeah, I've been there, done. Done that. So again, and let me tell you, you cannot manufacture that. I don't care how many followers you have. I don't care how many people pat you on the back and give you likes. I don't care. You can't manufacture that. That is sheer life. That is sheer road trauma. That is sheer, breaking up the fallow ground and just saying, this just has to be walked in order to teach it. And that's what you're doing in the days of small beginnings. You're building that foundation.
So good.
Oh, I love this so much. This conversation, I think we could keep going and going. It's so interesting to me that Carrie and I have already plotted out what our next year's theme is going to be, and it's the next right step. And just hearing you talk about Act 3, okay, I have this call, I have this vision, Lord. How are you going to now weave the story of my life all together for the next right step? And I think
I'll raise my hand when I know mine and come back on your show.
You will. Like, that's like a for sure invitation. Please be ready to accept it again.
That's right.
I do have to tell you this just on the show, because Carrie and I will look back on this moment with giggling and laughter. But this past weekend, we accepted an invitation. She does. We accepted an invitation to be a part of this lovely experience, but part of it entailed us dressing up as Bethlehem townspeople. I said, well, this is a season of saying yes, Lord, because we're going to look back at this time and be like, wow, we put in some time, and
we paid our dues. Paid our dues. Yeah.
And we will look back and think, Lord, this was the year of humility, and we thank you for the learning experience. But you know what? None of it's wasted. None of it is wasted.
That's right.
I agree. 100%.
Well, do you have any other last minute things that you want to share? I mean, again, we'll do part 2 next year with the next right step. But for the small beginnings, seasons of not knowing where you are, but trusting the Lord to be faithful to what He's called you to. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners?
Just keep your knees on the ground. Just stay close to what God's called you to do. Don't be so hard on yourself. To really allow yourself to be human, to allow yourself to fall on the mercies of God, and to not be afraid to step back and start over if you need to, or to take a break. And I want to encourage both of you ladies. First of all, you are both very good at what you do. Your questions are insightful, your background, your professionalism in doing it. You look good, you sound good. And I know that your message is so needed. Young moms especially have so much pressure on them to be more than what God called them to do, and that's just to be good moms and to be good wives and to be good sisters in Christ to the women around them. And so I just encourage you to keep being the voice to encourage that group, and to keep being the listening ear and the safe place for them to come, because that's so rare. There's so few places for that.
So good.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that.
I just, the biggest thing that I think I'm going to take from this call is the contentment piece, and just wherever we are, just be content with that, because God can multiply it when He sees fit for it. And maybe He doesn't, and it just stays right where it is, and it grows and flourishes in that way. Yes. Thank you, Kathy.
Yes,
Carrie,
you're so welcome.
Yeah, I feel like I have so much things to say, but we got to be done. I love it. We'll have you on again.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Kathy, and to my fellow co-host, Carrie, thank you. And to all of our fellow warrior raisers, aim your arrows well.
Thanks for listening to the Warrior Raiser podcast. If you liked today's episode, please like, subscribe, and share it. Or for more information, feel free to follow us on www.warriorraiser.com.